I was staring death in the face, and the man I loved, the one who rejected me, just chose to drink the poison instead. The cup was ice cold in my hand, but the blood pounding beneath my skin was boiling hot. This wasn't a choice, it was an execution. Drink, Jocelyn. Or perhaps you'd rather the king see his rejected mate defying a direct order from his Luna. Brielle's voice was a low velvet poison, perfectly audible only to me over the cheerful cacophony of the Shadow Moon Pack's annual harvest banquet. I stood by the grand mahogany table, the table of the Alpha King, dressed in the scratchiest, most forgettable servant's tunic I could find. My hands were shaking so hard I thought the silver goblet would shatter before it reached my lips. I looked at the contents. The liquid was dark purple, thick, and smelled faintly of sweet, crushed berries, completely masking the metallic tang of something sinister. It was a traditional celebratory drink, but Brielle had insisted on pouring this particular cup herself, pressing it into my hand only moments ago, her perfect smile never wavering. "She's trying to kill me," a small, rational voice screamed in the chaos of my mind. Oh, not kill. Brielle was too clever for murder. This would be a slow poison, a crippling illness, or perhaps just a powerful drug that would make me disgrace myself in front of the assembled royalty, the perfect excuse for her to have me banished or locked away forever. She hated that I still drew breath in the same territory as him, the Alpha King Kian, even 3 years after his soul-crushing rejection. Just drink it, Jocelyn. Get it over with. It's better than facing her wrath. The mantra of the rejected mate. My gaze flicked across the room, past the glittering chandeliers and the faces of the most powerful shifters on the continent, until it landed where it always did, on the king. Kian. He sat at the head of the table, a monumental figure of granite and shadow. His dark hair was meticulously styled, his jaw sharp, his silver eyes that once promised me everything, were currently fixed on a beta discussing trade routes. He was massive, powerful, and utterly unreachable. Every line of his body screamed king, not mate. He hadn't looked at me once tonight, and why would he? I was less than wallpaper to him. I was Jocelyn, the low-ranking Omega he publicly discarded for being too weak and unfit to stand beside him. I was raising the rim of the cup, ready to swallow the inevitable pain and disgrace when it happened. Kian didn't move. He didn't even shift his posture, still listening intently to the beta. But his head tilted, just a fraction of an inch, and the beta's words died in his throat. Kian's expression, usually a mask of cold indifference, flickered with a sudden, devastating confusion. He's looking at me now, but he's not seeing me. I saw the split second of raw, painful emotion cross his face, an ache so profound it mirrored the one that lived permanently in my own chest. What is wrong? Brielle, standing right beside me, saw the shift in his gaze too. Her perfect smile tightened. Hurry, dear. You're holding up the king's dinner service, she hissed, her voice barely a whisper. She pressed her hand firmly onto my wrist, a silent command. Drink. No. My mind, terrified, sent up a desperate, silent plea, a surge of pure, raw panic that had been building for 3 years of loneliness and abuse. I can't do this anymore. Please, Kian, just see me. I'm tired. The king's head snapped up. It was instantaneous. His silver eyes, previously distant, zeroed in on me with the lethal speed of a striking viper. He didn't look at the cup. He looked directly into my eyes, and for the first time since the rejection, I felt the sharp, undeniable connection of the mate bond, the connection he had severed. It felt like a live wire had been reattached, shocking me down to my bones. But his eyes weren't cold anymore. They were wide, horrified, and filled with a frantic realization. He stood up. The scraping of his chair on the marble floor was deafening. Every conversation in the massive hall ceased instantly. 300 pairs of eyes locked onto the king. King Kian, is everything all right? Brielle asked, her voice laced with honey, even as her eyes burned with rage at being interrupted. Kian didn't answer her. He didn't take his eyes off me. He started walking. He was only 10 feet away, but the distance felt like a marathon. Every step he took was slow, measured, and filled with terrifying purpose. Brielle shifted, trying to step between us, her hand still clamped on my wrist. Jocelyn was just about to have the refreshment, my king. A reward for her diligence. Kian was right in front of us now. The raw power radiating off him made the air feel thin. He smelled of pine, ancient magic, and the crushing weight of kingship. He reached out. Not for my face, not for my hand. He reached for the cup. His enormous, warm fingers wrapped around the delicate silver, covering mine. I felt the heat of him, the familiar strength that was my doom and my salvation. Move your hand, Brielle. Kian's voice was a low, dangerous rumble that echoed across the silent room. Brielle's face went white beneath her perfect makeup. She slowly released my wrist, stepping back half a pace, her eyes darting between the cup and the king's face. Kian pulled the cup from my numb grip. He looked down at the dark liquid, then up at Brielle, and finally he looked back at me. His silver eyes were now blazing, filled with a ferocious protection I hadn't seen in 3 long years. He knew. Somehow he knew what Brielle had done. Then the king of the Shadow Moon Pack, the most powerful man on the continent, raised the cup of certain poison. The poison meant to end his rejected mate, to his own lips. My breath hitched. No. I gasped, the sound tearing out of my throat, my first protest in years. He ignored me. He didn't hesitate. He tilted the cup back and drained the dark liquid in one long, deliberate swallow. The silence was absolute. Everyone was frozen. I watched, horrified, as his perfect jaw flexed and the last drop vanished. Kian lowered the empty cup. He was pale, but his posture was still impeccably kingly. He stared straight at Brielle, who was now trembling visibly. It tastes, Kian said, his voice terrifyingly calm, like treason. And then his massive body swayed. He clutched his chest, and before anyone could move, the great Alpha King Kian, ruler of the Shadow Moon, collapsed onto the pristine marble floor, the empty silver cup clattering beside him. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Comment below and let me know where you are watching from and what the weather is like there today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next exciting story. The moment Kian hit the floor, the perfect composure of the Shadow Moon Pack banquet shattered. It wasn't just a man collapsing. It was the foundation of the werewolf world shaking. A roar, primal and wounded, tore from the throat of Gavin, the beta, who had been standing slightly behind Kian. Gavin, a man whose face was usually set in the stern, capable lines of a field commander, was suddenly all raw panic. He lunged forward, sliding to his knees beside the king's massive, still form. He needs help. Call the healers. Now. Gavin's voice boomed, cutting through the horrified murmurs that had begun to rise from the assembled royalty. I was still standing there, frozen, the ghost of the silver cup cold on my palm. My entire world had narrowed to the sight of Kian's chest. Was it rising? Was he breathing? The powerful, steady scent of pine and royal strength was now tainted by a bitter, metallic odor. The poison. Brielle, who had been struck dumb by Kian's sudden, dramatic action, finally moved. But her movement wasn't towards the king. She spun on me, her mask of grace disintegrating into a viper's snarl. You set this up, she shrieked, her voice high and unstable. The king caught you trying to poison his wine and he made the sacrifice. Guards. Seize the rejected Omega. She has committed treason. My blood ran cold. The price. The consequence I had feared wasn't just humiliation. It was death. Brielle was using the spectacle to frame me perfectly. I was the lowest of the low, the one person everyone already expected to harbor resentment. Who would believe the rejected Omega over the official Luna? 2 large, uniformed guards immediately broke formation and grabbed my arms. Their grips were painful, crushing the bones beneath their thick gloves. I didn't do anything. He poured it. She gave it to me. I cried out, my voice weak and cracking, a desperate squeak against the wave of powerful accusations. Brielle stepped forward, her eyes glittering with malicious triumph. Silence, traitor. I saw you near the cellar earlier today. You were caught with the same type of nightshade used to thicken that drink. You thought to assassinate the king and install a new regime, didn't you, Jocelyn? Nightshade? That was the name of the toxic herb I used to ward off garden pests at the Elder Care Center. A legal pack-issued tool. But in Brielle's hands the truth was irrelevant. The guards began to drag me backwards, away from the scene, away from the king. I fought against their strength, twisting my body, my eyes fixed on Kian. He was being lifted now, carefully, by Gavin and 2 other high-ranking betas. His head was lolling slightly, his face ashen. I couldn't leave him like this. My wolf, the small, suppressed thing I kept chained deep inside, was howling in agony, tearing at its metaphorical bars. Mate. Danger. Kian. I screamed a final ragged plea. As if my sound, my pain, was the only thing anchoring him to this world. Kian's eyes flickered open. Just for a moment. They found mine across the room. They weren't focused on Brielle's venom or the guards dragging me away. They were fixed only on me, and in that fleeting second I saw not a king but a man in pain, a man full of a sudden, shattering regret. And then his eyes rolled back and he was unconscious again. I was hauled out of the grand hall, the sound of Brielle's triumphant saccharine voice ringing after me. She is to be secured immediately. No contact. The king will have justice when he wakes. I was thrown into the pack's holding cells, a place reserved mostly for rowdy drunk shifters or minor thieves. It was damp, smelled of stale concrete and despair, and was bitterly cold. I huddled against the stone wall, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was alone. The rejected mate. I had nothing. No status, no family to mourn me, and now no defense. I was facing an execution warrant, and the only person who knew the truth was dying or perhaps already dead. Hours bled into eternity. I didn't cry. My emotions were too big for tears. They were a silent, crushing weight that felt like it would crack my soul. I kept replaying the scene. Kian's realization, the devastating eye contact, the choice. Why would he drink it? He had rejected me. He had chosen Brielle. Why would he sacrifice himself for the person he had publicly abandoned? A sudden sharp clang of the outer door broke the silence. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoed down the hallway. I tensed, expecting a torturer or perhaps the formal execution order. The footsteps stopped at my cell door. I looked up and saw Gavin. His face was drawn, etched with exhaustion and profound worry. He was leaning heavily against the bars, his shoulders slumped. He looked less like the formidable beta and more like a man whose world had imploded. "Jocelyn," he said, his voice flat. Is Kian alive?" I whispered, the name catching in my throat. Gavin looked at the floor, rubbed the back of his neck, and let out a heavy sigh. "He is. Barely. The poison was potent, but not fast-acting enough for Brielle's ultimate plan. Our healers managed to slow the effects. He's in a coma now. But stable. For the moment." Relief washed over me, so strong it almost made me faint. He was alive. "Thank the goddess," I murmured. Gavin looked up, his eyes meeting mine. They were guarded, assessing. "The king is alive, but you are still here, accused of high treason. Brielle has secured a formal warrant for your interrogation and a trial by the council as soon as Kian is conscious enough to condemn you." "I didn't do it, Gavin," I insisted, pushing myself to my feet. "She is lying. She handed me the cup and told me to drink it. She tried to poison me." Gavin leaned closer to the bars, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I believe you, Jocelyn." His words stunned me. You do. Brielle is not my king's mate. She is a political necessity, and a cruel one at that," he growled, the raw truth spilling out. "She's been pushing Kian to declare you formally banished for months, creating petty charges, stolen rations, neglecting your duties. But more than that," he hesitated, glancing nervously down the empty corridor. "What is it?" I urged. "I was watching Kian. Right before he collapsed. He didn't just see the drink. He saw you," Gavin explained, his brow furrowed in confusion. "The king has been distant even from me these past few months. But tonight when he looked at you it was different. Like he heard something. Like he felt something that cut through the distance. He looked like his soul had been hit by lightning. I remembered the electric shock of his gaze, the sudden raw connection. He heard her thoughts. Was it possible the Lycan blood, the silent power that was supposedly dormant in my lineage, was somehow reaching him? He saw what she was doing, I stated firmly, though I didn't know how. He drank it to protect me, Gavin. You. Gavin sighed again, shaking his head. If that's true, then we have a major problem. Because if he knew, then Brielle knew he knew. And if she's willing to poison him, she's willing to destroy us all to stay queen. She's too powerful in the eyes of the council. You and I alone cannot fight this. We need proof. He pulled a small, tightly rolled piece of parchment from his tunic and slipped it through the bars. This is a map of the lower service tunnels. One of them leads out past the perimeter fence. It's barely guarded because it's so old and unstable. Tonight, the focus is entirely on the king's chambers and locking down the pack. I stared at the map, then back at him. You want me to run? You are accused of treason. The council will decide on Brielle's word, not yours. They would rather execute an innocent Omega than admit the Luna is a traitor. Your trial is a formality, Jocelyn. You need to get out of the territory now. Find someone, anyone outside of Brielle's influence who can protect you until the king wakes and can clear your name. If you stay, you are dead before morning. He paused, his eyes grave. If you survive, you can try to find the evidence we need from the outside. If you die here, Kian dies not knowing the truth and Brielle wins. The burden of saving the king's life, of clearing my name, was suddenly placed squarely on my shoulders. I was an underdog, a rejected mate, but if I ran I could fight. If I stayed I would be a casualty. I clutched the map, the thin paper crinkling in my hand. Where should I go? Go north. To the neutral zone. Find the old mining town, Blackwood. It's beyond our borders. Stay hidden. I will try to find something here. But for the love of the moon, Jocelyn, run. He turned sharply, his heavy footsteps retreating, leaving me in the darkness with a flimsy map, a heavy accusation, and the desperate, terrifying duty of saving the man who broke my heart. The door clanged shut, plunging the hallway into silence again. I looked down at the map, the lines faint in the dark. Treason. Banishment. Run. I had to be faster than the king's guards, smarter than the vengeful Luna, and stronger than the despair that had been my constant companion for 3 years. I had to run not just for my life but for his. The rejected Omega was finally free, but her freedom came with a death sentence. The chase had begun. The air in the tunnel tasted ancient and metallic, thick with the damp scent of earth and time. I moved through the narrow passageway outlined on Gavin's map, the parchment now damp and smudged in my grip. My heart was a frantic hummingbird trapped in my chest, beating time with the distant shouts of guards above me. Brielle was not wasting any time. She was trying to secure her victory before Kian's body could even process the poison. The service tunnel was a claustrophobic nightmare, built for piping, not people. I had to crouch, scraping my shoulders against the cold, rough stone. Every few feet, a loose rock would tumble, making a noise that sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. I moved entirely on instinct now, pushing the terror of my impending execution aside and focusing only on the coordinates Gavin had marked. Perimeter breach. I was moving across the very foundations of the kingdom that had cast me out. The Alpha King's territory was immense, guarded by layers of magic and hundreds of trained shifters. Running was suicide, but staying was guaranteed death. After what felt like hours, the air began to change. Instead of stale earth, I smelled pine, the clean, sharp scent of the woods outside. Ahead, a faint, sickly green light filtered through a narrow crack. I pressed my ear to the cold stone wall just before the exit point. I could hear heavy breathing and the rhythmic, lazy pacing of a guard on the other side. My wolf, normally a shy, silent creature, stirred with a tense anxiety, urging me to be still, to be invisible. The gap was less than a foot wide, blocked mostly by an ancient, rusted grate. I had to squeeze through a tiny broken section at the bottom. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I focused. I needed to be small, silent, and fast. I shed my outer tunic, the servant's uniform that would identify me instantly, leaving me in a simple thin camisole and worn trousers. Slowly, painstakingly, I forced my body through the jagged metal and broken concrete. The metal ripped at my skin, leaving long, hot trails of pain, but I didn't cry out. With a final grunt, I tumbled out onto the cold, damp earth of the forest floor, landing silently in a thick patch of ferns. I was just outside the reinforced perimeter wall. The king's guard, a massive beta with a bored expression, was walking away from me towards the main gate. I was safe for 3 seconds. I scrambled up, ignoring the burning scrapes on my legs and arms. The moment my feet found purchase on the soft soil, I ran. Not as a werewolf runs, sleek and powerful, but as a terrified human fueled by pure adrenaline. I ran for the closest, darkest thicket, plunging into the labyrinth of towering pines and black shadows. I ran for 30 minutes, pushing until my lungs burned and the metallic taste of effort was strong on my tongue. When I finally collapsed beneath the massive roots of an old oak, I was far enough into the wilderness that I couldn't hear the distant calls of the searching pack patrols. I was outside the Shadow Moon territory. I was free. I was also alone, bruised, penniless, and wanted for treason. As the immediate panic receded, the deeper, more profound pain began to surface. Kian. Why did he do it? The question was a hammer blow to my weary mind. I closed my eyes, trying to recapture that last raw moment of connection. His eyes weren't accusing or rejecting. They were protective. He heard her thoughts. Gavin's theory replayed in my head. My grandmother, who raised me, used to tell me stories about our distant Lycan ancestors. They were always considered myth. A few drops of ancient, powerful blood that didn't manifest in our low-ranking family. But one tale was persistent. Lycans, when a bond was truly forged, could perceive the genuine emotional state and intent of their mate, cutting through lies and distance. Kian had always seemed like a pure alpha, not Lycan. But what if the stress of being king, the political pressure, and the 3 years of emotional suppression had triggered something latent in his connection to my Lycan blood? What if his mind was finally open to the truth of my feelings? My fear, my loyalty, my despair. And when he heard my silent panic over the poison, his kingly instinct and his mate instinct fused into that one self-sacrificing act. The thought gave me a flicker of fierce, desperate hope. If he drank the poison to save me, he didn't hate me. He just couldn't be with me. But then an unbearable wave of guilt crashed over me. He was dying because of me. Because he protected me. I have to save him. I forced myself up. I checked the map. Blackwood, the neutral zone, was 3 days' journey on foot following the river north. I needed supplies, a disguise, and most of all, distance from Brielle's inevitable pursuit. As I began to walk, trying to maintain a silent, steady pace, I noticed a scent. It wasn't the general pack patrol scent, nor the fresh pine and wet soil of the forest. This scent was distinct, fierce, and entirely familiar. It was Kian's scent. It was faint but unmistakable. The deep, powerful aroma of pine and ancient magic, laced with that distinct, bitter taint of sickness I had smelled in the ballroom. It was strong enough to suggest he had been here recently. Impossible. He was comatose, guarded by healers and betas in the main keep miles away. My pace faltered. I stopped dead, scanning the dense woods. The scent was directly behind me, maybe only 20 feet back. It was stronger there, mingling with the unmistakable heavy scent of a massive wolf. A shiver of absolute terror went down my spine, stronger than the fear of the guards. Is it a patrol tracking me with his clothes? I crept back, hiding behind a thick bush. I peered through the undergrowth. There was nothing. Just shadows and trees. But the scent was overwhelming now. It wasn't the scent of his clothes. It was the scent of his wolf. Massive, dominant, and breathing deeply. My wolf, the usually timid creature, suddenly let out a strangled whimper. Then I saw it. Just a glimpse. Behind a veil of dripping moss, there was a shadow that didn't belong to a tree. It was too broad, too low to the ground. And the eyes, 2 pinpoints of cold, brilliant silver light, were staring directly at my hiding spot. It was not a man. It was the largest wolf I had ever imagined, a dark, nearly black beast whose shoulders seemed to graze the level of the bushes. It was the legendary Lycan-sized shadow wolf that belonged only to the Alpha King. Kian's wolf. But Kian was poisoned. Kian was in a coma. Panic gave way to a chilling realization. If the poison had affected his human form, it might have triggered an involuntary shift in his wolf. A desperate, instinctual escape fueled by the mate bond and the urgency of the threat against me. His wolf might have overridden his human mind, broken out of the keep and tracked me into the woods. If he was shifted, he wouldn't be rational. He would be pure instinct, a magnificent beast driven by the need to secure his mate, and he was critically ill. A shifted wolf cannot fight off a poison intended for a human. He shifted his weight. The scent of sickness was stronger, a sweet, cloying note beneath the pine. He was following me, wounded and delirious, clinging to the mate bond he had publicly denied. I had to get away from him, or his weakened state would expose us both to Brielle's hunters. And if his wolf succumbed to the poison out here, I would be unable to help. Tears finally spilled onto my cheeks. I was being chased not by my enemies, but by the dying, instinctual love of the man who rejected me. I crept backward, away from the terrifying silver gaze, trying to move silently. I looked up at the moon, which was just a crescent, a sliver of cold light through the canopy. I can't save you if they catch us both, I whispered into the mossy earth, knowing the beast could probably hear me. I turned and ran again, pushing my tired legs to their absolute limit. I ran toward the neutral zone, But now my flight had a new, agonizing layer of terror. I was running from the dying king, trying to outpace his frantic, poisoned love. I ran until dawn broke, painting the eastern sky in bruised purples and pale, sickly yellows. My energy reserves were gone, replaced by raw, grinding fatigue. The cold weight of fear was amplified by the terrible, constant knowledge that behind me, the king's enormous poisoned wolf was tracking me. Every few hundred yards I would stop, breathless, and confirm the scent. It was always there. Kian's unique regal pine, now sickly and faint, following my trail. He wasn't catching up, but he wasn't giving up either. His strength was fading, but his instinct to find and secure his mate, the one he'd spent 3 years denying, was terrifyingly potent. Finally, the forest gave way to a rough, rocky terrain. I had reached the northernmost edge of the Shadow Moon's wild territory and crossed into the neutral zone. A vast, unregulated stretch of mountains and forgotten towns where the various packs and human settlements tolerated each other, mostly out of mutual disinterest. Just ahead, nestled in a valley carved by the river, was the mining town Gavin had mentioned, Blackwood. It was a cluster of ramshackle wooden buildings, many half-collapsed, clinging precariously to the mountainside. Smoke curled lazily from a few chimneys, suggesting life, but the place had the air of a ghost town. I slowed to a walk, trying to look like a weary, harmless hiker, not a fugitive wanted for regicide. I needed to disappear into the anonymity of this forgotten corner of the world. My first priority was finding a place to clean up and treat the scrapes from the tunnel. My second, far more urgent task, was to lose Kian's trail. If his scent followed me into Blackwood, the locals, a mix of rogues, out-of-pack shifters and tough human settlers, would notice the scent of an Alpha King's wolf and realize who I was. I spotted a faint dirt-covered lane that led away from the main town toward an abandoned stone quarry. Perfect. I veered off, following the lane to a small, secluded pool of clear, icy spring water. I tore off my bloodied clothes and plunged into the frigid water. The cold was shocking, stealing my breath, but the relief of washing off the grime, the sweat, and the scent of the pack was immediate. I scrubbed my skin raw, washing my hair repeatedly, trying to erase every trace of Shadow Moon from me. As I dressed in the clean, dry clothes I'd tied around my waist, just a simple gray shirt and dark pants, I noticed something terrifying. On the soft, damp moss just a few feet from the pool, there was a single massive paw print. The print of Kian's wolf. He had followed me right to the water's edge. His fevered, instinctual mind had known I was here, but the cold water was doing its job. It had completely masked my scent, forcing him to stop. Looking into the dark, silent woods behind me, I felt a deep, wrenching pity. He was out there alone, sick, and chasing a ghost. He was doing the one thing he had rejected me to avoid, putting himself in grave danger because of me. I whispered a plea to the silent forest. Go back, Kian. Fight it. Please go back. I couldn't stay. With the king's wolf so close, I was a walking time bomb. I reached the center of Blackwood. The main building was a saloon with a rickety sign reading, "The Rusty Axe." I pushed open the swinging doors and stepped into a haze of pipe smoke, stale beer, and the low, suspicious murmurs of the patrons. Everyone here was carrying scars, physical, emotional, or both, and they were experts at spotting trouble. I tried to melt into the shadows, making my way to the bar. "Water," I requested, my voice raspy. "And if you have any stale bread, I'll pay." The bartender, a burly, scarred man with eyes the color of faded denim, slid a mug of water my way. His name, embroidered on his apron, was Silas. Silas leaned in, wiping his hands on a damp towel. "You got the look of a runner, girl. Fresh off the trail, too clean to be a regular traveler. What pack are you escaping from?" I flinched. He saw right through me. "I'm just passing through," I lied, taking a long drink. "Looking for work outside the territories." Silas chuckled, a low, gravelly sound. "There's no outside the territories around here, sweetheart. This is the territory. Neutral zone means no flag but a lot of eyes. And your fear smells louder than my cheap whiskey." He fixed me with an intense, unblinking stare. "The big packs are restless. And you, girl, you smell like trouble of the royal variety. I don't care about your drama, but I care about my peace. So let's cut to the chase. I need a kitchen hand. Hard work, long hours, minimal questions. You get a bed, food, and I'll make sure nobody bothers you. You look like you need a safe hole to hide in." It was the first shred of kindness I'd been offered in years, cold and purely transactional though it was. A sanctuary. I'll take it, I said instantly. My name is Jocelyn. And I can work. Silas nodded, satisfied. Good. No last names in Blackwood, Jocelyn. Too much baggage. Start by cleaning those tables. And stay away from the windows. I went straight to work, grateful for the distraction. The physical labor was grounding, the exhaustion a welcome shield against my panic. I worked for 2 days, scrubbing floors, chopping vegetables and avoiding eye contact. Silas was a hard boss but a fair one. He kept the town roughnecks away from me and he never asked a single personal question. I was Jocelyn, the quiet kitchen hand, and that was all I was allowed to be. On the third evening, just as the saloon was filling up with the dinner rush, I was carrying a heavy tray of empty dishes back to the kitchen. My wolf, dormant and quiet for the last 48 hours, suddenly went rigid. A new scent had entered the bar. It wasn't Kian's wild, sick pine. This was something sweet, cloying and utterly hateful. Brielle. The Luna herself or one of her immediate high-ranking scouts. They hadn't sent a general patrol. They had sent a personal, lethal hunter. I froze behind the swinging doors, my blood turning to ice. My eyes scanned the room through the small window in the kitchen door. 2 figures sat at a corner table. One was a sharp-featured, elegant man I didn't recognize. A high-ranking beta, likely. The other was unmistakable. It was a woman, dressed in rugged but expensive hunting leathers, her back to me, but the cascade of perfect golden hair confirmed it. It wasn't Brielle. But it was Cassidy, Brielle's most loyal, vicious lieutenant and chief scout. Cassidy was known for her relentless tracking skills and her devotion to the Luna's ambition. I heard the sound of her voice, low and arrogant, as she spoke to the man opposite her. The king's scent is all over the northern woods, Beta Jace. It's thickest right up to the quarry. It's confirmed the king's wolf is tracking her. Delirious, sick and protecting the treacherous Omega. I gripped the tray so hard my knuckles were white. They know. They know Kian's wolf followed me. Then the king has compromised himself, Beta Jace muttered, sounding bored. The official story is that the traitor tried to flee and the king's royal guards are pursuing her. If the feral Alpha King wolf is found protecting her, the council will only see it as proof of his instability. Brielle will secure the vote. Cassidy chuckled, a dry, satisfied sound. Precisely. We don't need to kill the Omega quickly, Jace. We need to lure her out and let the king's wolf lead us to the king's vulnerability. We let the rejected mate become the king's executioner, one way or another. My entire body was shaking. They weren't just hunting me. They were using Kian's delirious, loyal wolf as bait to prove he was unfit to rule, ensuring Brielle's takeover. I had to warn Kian's wolf. I had to divert the hunters. But if I left Blackwood, the only safe place I had, I would lead them straight to the dying king. A choice, raw and agonizing, hit me. Stay safe in the shadows of Blackwood, or sacrifice my sanctuary to save the king who had rejected me. I placed the tray down silently and slipped out the back exit, my heart now beating with grim resolve. I wouldn't let Brielle use Kian's sacrifice against him. I knew their plan and now I would destroy it. My decision was instant and terrifyingly clear. I could not stay in Blackwood while the Luna's hunters used the dying Alpha King's loyalty as a political weapon. Brielle wasn't just looking for an execution. She was orchestrating a coup. Slipping out the back door of the rusty axe, I plunged back into the chilly darkness of the neutral zone. The mountain air was thin and sharp, but my mind was clearer than it had been since the banquet. I had a target, Cassidy and Beta Jace. I had to lead them away from where Kian's scent was strongest, the quarry, and deep into the wilder, more remote mountains. I ran toward the western slope, away from the river that led to Shadow Moon territory. I didn't run quietly this time. I smashed through low-hanging branches, deliberately scuffing the stones, leaving an obvious, frantic trail. I wanted them to know they were tracking a desperate, easy prey. But I had to keep Kian's wolf informed. If he continued tracking my real trail to Blackwood, he would walk straight into Cassidy's ambush. I stopped abruptly on a rocky outcrop overlooking a steep ravine. I knelt, pushing down the agonizing fear of exposure, and forced my wolf, that quiet, wounded part of me, to assert itself. We were rejected. We were low-ranking. But we were still connected to the Alpha King. Taking a deep breath, I focused all my emotional energy, all the pain and terror and fierce loyalty I held for Kian, and broadcast it silently, desperately through the severed mate bond. So, I visualized his massive black form, the fevered silver eyes. I visualized the sharp-featured Cassidy waiting for him. I pictured the poisonous drink, the collapse, the betrayal. Irsic, they are hunting you. They will kill you to take the throne. Do not follow the fear. Follow the cold. Go to the high caves. Heal. It was a psychic scream of warning, a violation of the distance Kian had imposed. I felt a crushing wave of vulnerability wash over me, the deep ache of the bond responding to the pressure, but I didn't care. He had to hear me. For a long moment the forest was silent. I waited, trembling, feeling exposed beneath the indifferent stars. Then from the direction of the quarry miles away I felt a faint, psychic echo. It wasn't a coherent response. It was a confused, agonized ripple of pain, heat, and raw, instinctual recognition. Like a powerful radio trying to tune into a distant signal. Then the scent changed. Kian's sickly pine scent, which had been tracking steadily toward Blackwood, suddenly veered. It was moving uphill towards the highest, coldest peaks, the direction I had pointed him toward. The direction of survival. My warning had reached him. He was listening even in his fevered wolf state. I let out a ragged sob of relief and immediately turned back to my own trail, pushing forward with renewed purpose. Now I needed to make my escape look convincing. I ran for another hour, moving higher into the rocky terrain, until I reached a narrow, treacherous ridge that offered a commanding view of the valley. It was the perfect place for an ambush, either mine or theirs. As I expected, I began to pick up two new scents. The sweet, false perfume of Cassidy and the metallic musk of Beta Jace, closing fast. They were excellent trackers. My exaggerated trail had worked. I concealed myself behind a stack of granite boulders, grabbing a handful of sharp, fist-sized stones. My plan was simple: diversion. I couldn't fight them, but I could blind and slow them down. The sound of their feet on the shale grew louder. They were moving confidently, certain they had cornered the weak, rejected Omega. "She's tired, Jace." "Pathetic." Cassidy's voice drifted up, laced with disdain. "The Alpha King nearly killed himself for that. He has lost his mind." Beta Jace responded with a heavy sigh. "Focus, Cassidy. We secure her, then we secure the evidence. The weapon, the King's public confession of her treason. It needs to be tidy." They rounded the corner onto the ridge, moving quickly. Cassidy was leading, her eyes scanning the rocks ahead. This was my chance. With a powerful surge of adrenaline, I launched the stones. Not at them, but at a loose section of rock face above their heads. The shriek of sliding shale and stone was deafening. The impact sent a cascade of small boulders tumbling down the narrow path between them and me. "Ambush!" Cassidy screamed, drawing a wicked-looking hunting knife. But Jace, smarter and more cautious, recognized the sound. "It's a distraction. She's not trying to fight, she's running." The brief chaos was enough. I scrambled over the backside of the ridge and tumbled down the steep, wooded slope, ignoring the pain of the whipping branches and the jarring impacts. I could hear their immediate, furious pursuit behind me. Cassidy, who shifted into a swift, tawny wolf, and Jace, moving at frightening human speed. "Don't let her escape. Brielle wants her alive." Cassidy's wolf snarl echoed terrifyingly close. I wasn't fast enough. They were trained hunters and I was just Jocelyn, the caretaker. Just as I reached the bottom of the slope, exhausted and winded, Cassidy's wolf burst through the trees. She wasn't aiming to kill, she aimed to disable. Her massive jaws clamped down not on my throat, but on my ankle, tearing through the thin fabric and sinking sharp teeth into my flesh. A scream tore from my throat, a mix of pain and pure white-hot fury. I hit the ground hard, gasping. Cassidy's wolf stood over me, her jaws still locked on my ankle, her silver eyes gleaming with savage triumph. "It's over, rejected mate," she growled, her voice a mix of human speech and canine menace. "You should have stayed and died quietly." Pain flared in my leg, blindingly intense. I knew the bone wasn't broken, but the wound was deep and immediately began to soak the dirt beneath me. I couldn't shift. My wolf was too weak, too small. I looked up at my captor. Cassidy was massive, powerful, and utterly merciless. Before she could inflict a greater injury, Beta Jace arrived, breathless. "Don't tear her up, Cassidy. We need her intact. Restrain her." Cassidy gave a reluctant, frustrated whine, releasing my ankle to shift into her human form. She was instantly beside me, pulling rough rope from her pack. I curled into a ball, clutching my bleeding leg, forcing myself to look helpless even as my mind raced. This is it. They are taking me back to Brielle. Kian's sacrifice was for nothing. Just as Cassidy knelt to tie my wrists, a scent, faint and bitter, drifted on the wind from the high peaks. It was Kian's pine, but this time it was different. It was still sick, still poisoned, but beneath the sickness there was a tiny, cold spark of focus. It was the scent of a mind struggling through delirium, fighting to assert control. And then I felt the psychic pressure again. Not a panicked shriek like mine, but a cold, deep, resonant tone. Mate. Safe. It was Kian. The wolf form had processed my warning, secured itself in the high caves, and was now, despite the poison tearing through his system, reaching out to me. Cassidy, focused on binding my hands, didn't notice the scent shift. She didn't feel the sudden, cold pressure in the air. But Jace did. He looked up, his brow furrowed, scanning the distant, dark peaks. "Did you feel that, Cassidy?" Jace murmured, his voice tense. A sudden, cold pressure. The air just shifted. Cassidy tugged the ropes tight. "It's nothing, Jace. Just the mountain chill. She's secured. Let's move out. Brielle is waiting for her prize." They hauled me roughly to my feet. The pain in my ankle made me gasp, but I bit back any other sound. I was a prisoner, but I was not defeated. Kian was safe for now. And he knew I was his mate. As they began to drag me back towards Blackwood, back towards the Shadow Moon territory and Brielle's cruel justice, I looked up at the distant, silent mountains. I sent a final, desperate message on the faint, open line of the bond. "I'm coming home, my king." But not on my feet. The journey back was a nightmare of pain and cold dread. Cassidy and Beta Jace didn't carry me. They dragged me, forcing me to hop and stumble on my wounded ankle. They showed no mercy, driven by the lure of Brielle's reward and the satisfaction of capturing the king's public enemy. My hands were bound tightly in front of me and the rope chafed my wrists raw. As we neared the Shadow Moon territory, the landscape began to change from the wild, neutral mountains to the manicured, orderly perfection of the Alpha King's domain. The powerful magical wards I had struggled to cross on my way out now hummed ominously as we passed through them. "The king remains stable but unconscious," Jace murmured to Cassidy, checking his communication device. "Brielle has locked down the keep. She says the council is preparing the formal motion to name her regent by morning. They're just waiting for the last piece of proof." "And that," Cassidy sneered, giving my bound wrists a painful yank, "is Jocelyn's confession, or more accurately her corpse displayed as an example." Regent. Brielle wasn't waiting for Kian to die. She was seizing power while he was helpless, intending to rule permanently. I was the key to legitimizing her power grab. They didn't take me to the dungeons this time. They brought me straight into the king's royal wing of the keep. This was a place of immense opulence. Hushed halls lined with tapestries depicting generations of Shadow Moon power, but now it felt like a cold, echoing tomb. My escorts led me to the antechamber outside Kian's private sleeping quarters. The door was guarded by two stern, unfamiliar shifters, Brielle's men. "The Luna is waiting," one guard said, his face impassive. "No one else is permitted inside." They shoved me through the door. The room was vast, dominated by a large four-poster bed where Kian lay unnaturally still. Tubes ran from machines beside him, their gentle beeping the only sound in the suffocating silence. He was deathly pale, his strong jaw slack, his dark hair stark against the white pillows. Seeing him so vulnerable, so diminished, was a physical shock that made my heart seize up. This was not the Alpha King who had filled every room with his terrifying presence. And standing beside his bed, radiating smug victory, was Brielle. She looked immaculate, dressed in a sweeping gown of dark velvet, her golden hair perfectly styled. She held a vial of clear liquid, turning it idly in her fingers. "Jocelyn, how resourceful of you to return," Brielle purred, her eyes shining with malicious delight. Cassidy and Jace saluted and immediately backed away, leaving me alone with the Luna and the dying king. "You've caused such a fuss, rejected mate," Brielle continued, circling me slowly. "Running away, leading my top trackers on a merry chase. And all because you couldn't accept your place. All you had to do was drink the cup, suffer a quick illness and fade away. Now look at the mess." She gestured to the unconscious king. My poor Kian is comatose and the council is restless. You poisoned him, I whispered, my voice thick with rage and pain. You tried to kill me and he knew it. He drank it to protect me. Brielle laughed, a brittle, unpleasant sound. Oh, he thought he knew. Kian has been unstable lately, you see. Confused. He was having delusions, hearing voices, thinking his rejected mate was communicating with him. The poison was merely an anesthetic, really. It will keep him asleep until the council ratifies my regency. She stepped closer, holding the vial up to the light. This, however, is the real solution. A highly concentrated formula. Looks just like a normal nutrient drip. I will administer it and Kian will pass peacefully in his sleep. And when the council arrives to pay their respects and name me regent, they will find this note beside him. She nodded to a piece of parchment on the bedside table. I could just make out the elegant looping script. It's a note supposedly written moments before his collapse, Brielle explained sweetly. A final will and testament, confirming that he knew you were the traitor, that he drank the poison to expose you, and that he names me, his loyal Luna, as his regent until his heir is of age. My breath hitched. It was brilliant, cruel, and perfectly orchestrated. Her note, my presence as a captive, and the king's death, it all sealed her control. You won't get away with this, I spat, fear giving way to pure adrenaline. The pack will know. Brielle scoffed. The pack will know what I tell them, Jocelyn. They will know the rejected Omega was captured and confessed, moments before she was executed for regicide. She walked back to the bed, picking up the 4 syringe. And now for the final piece of theater. You, rejected mate, are going to watch your king die. Brielle expertly flicked the syringe, watching the clear liquid bubble at the tip. She began to approach Kian's foreline, ready to inject the final dose. My mind went into overdrive. I was bound, weak, and trapped. I had no weapons, no strength, and no voice that could pierce the walls of this keep. But I had the bond. The fractured, agonizing, open bond Kian had allowed to happen when he chose to protect me. I looked at Kian's pale, serene face. I sent out everything I had left. Not a quiet warning this time, but a torrential downpour of pure, raw emotion, focused entirely on the truth and the danger. Mate, wake up. I screamed the words mentally, pouring every ounce of my will into the transmission. I projected the scent of the poison, the feeling of Brielle's malicious hands on the syringe, the sight of the false will, the sound of the beeping machine. I forced him to feel my terror and my desperate loyalty. Brielle paused, her hand hovering over the 4 line. She looked briefly confused, as if she felt a sudden drop in the room's temperature. But Kian remained still. Despair, black and suffocating, threatened to consume me. It wasn't enough. My power, my Lycan trace, was too weak. In a last, primal surge, I projected not the danger but the pain of the rejection. I sent him the 3 years of agony, the loneliness, the humiliation, the feeling of having his massive wolf soul torn away from mine. You chose this. You chose to protect me by breaking me. Now if you die, your sacrifice was worthless, and your true mate dies by the hand of the woman who destroyed you both. Brielle finally inserted the needle into the port, preparing to push the plunger. And that was when it happened. A low, guttural sound, more wolf than man, ripped from Kian's chest. Brielle froze, her thumb millimeters from the plunger. Kian's body didn't move, but his massive Alpha King wolf, the one I had just felt retreat to the high caves, surged back through the bond and slammed into his human form. His eyelids snapped open. His eyes were no longer the silver of a controlled king, but the pure, untamed, blazing gold of a Lycan alpha awakened in a moment of mortal peril. His Lycan power, hidden, dormant, and fueled by my own latent blood, had finally erupted, driven by the poison, the threat, and the agonizing surge of the mate bond. In an instant he reached up, his massive hand moving with impossible speed, and his fingers wrapped around Brielle's wrist, the wrist holding the syringe. The grip was bone-crushingly tight. Brielle gasped, dropping the vial of death, which shattered harmlessly on the thick carpet. Kian didn't speak. He just stared at Brielle, his golden eyes burning into her soul, his face a mask of cold, lethal fury that was magnified 1,000 times by the shock of his awakening. He had heard everything. Brielle's perfect composure evaporated. She shrieked, clawing at his hand, her power failing completely in the face of his sudden, terrifying new strength. "Get out!" Kian roared, his voice shaking the crystal lamps, a sound that was pure, raw authority. Get her out. Brielle scrambled back from the bed, terrified. The two guards at the door rushed in, swords drawn. But before they could even decide who to strike, Kian's golden gaze swept over them, and their swords clattered uselessly to the ground. They couldn't move. Kian's Lycan power had frozen the room, leaving only me, the bound, rejected mate, standing in the horrified silence. His eyes finally found mine. They were still golden, but they held the clarity of perfect understanding. He saw the ropes, the wounded ankle, the exhaustion, and the loyalty. He saw everything. Jocelyn, he rasped, his voice still ragged from the poison, but laced with a power that made my knees buckle. He had returned. And he had chosen me not just with a sacrifice but with his awakened soul. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the frantic, shallow breaths of Brielle and the beeping of Kian's medical equipment. He was awake, but his body was still fighting a potent poison. His Lycan awakening had given him the strength to assert dominance, but the danger was far from over. Kian didn't take his eyes off me. He slowly, agonizingly, pulled the 4 needles from his arm, his golden gaze never wavering. The look he gave me was one of deep, shattering recognition, and a promise of justice. Brielle, Kian's voice was low, strained, and filled with a cold authority that demanded immediate obedience. Explain the vial. Brielle, realizing her perfectly orchestrated coup had imploded spectacularly, tried to regain her footing. She forced a false sob. Pai King, thank the moon you're awake. It was her. The traitor. Jocelyn. She broke free and rushed in with the poison. I intercepted her. I was merely showing the guard what she planned to inject you with. She is a dangerous assassin. Brielle pointed a trembling finger at me. Silence, Kian commanded. The word was a physical blow, vibrating with the raw power of his newly revealed Lycan status. He looked at the 2 guards Brielle had brought in, men who were still frozen, their swords on the ground. Guards. Remove the ropes from my mate's hands, Kian ordered. The word mate hung in the air, a devastating declaration that nullified 3 years of public rejection and cemented my place at his side. The guards, unable to resist the Lycan command, moved instantly, rushing to my side to free my chafed wrists. Brielle shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. Mate? You rejected her. You chose me. This is the poison talking, Kian. You are delirious. Kian swung his legs over the side of the bed. He was unsteady, but the sheer force of his will kept him upright. He walked past Brielle, his towering presence making her shrink away as if she had been slapped. He stopped in front of me. I looked up at him, tears blurring my vision. He was massive, his skin radiating unnatural heat from the fever, but his golden eyes were utterly focused on my injuries. He gently lifted my bound wrists, inspecting the raw, red skin. Then he looked down at my bleeding ankle. My wolf heard your fear, Jocelyn, he rasped, his voice close to my ear. The poison attacked my human senses, but your pain cut through the distance I tried to build. You saved me not once but twice. Forgive me for the blindness. He reached out and gently placed his hand on my cheek. The contact was electric, flooding my system with a soothing wave of Lycan energy. A silent, powerful claim. Then he turned, his gold eyes blazing across the room to the 2 guards and Brielle. She is not the traitor. The charges against Jocelyn are hereby vacated. Her position is now sealed. Luna of the Shadow Moon Pack. He didn't wait for a response. He pointed at Brielle. You false Luna tried to murder your king, usurp the throne and frame my mate. Your trial will be public and your punishment will be swift. He nodded to the 2 now unfrozen guards. Take her to the highest security cell. No contact. No communication. Her assets and political alliances are to be seized immediately. And inform the council. King Kian is awake, recovered, and my first act is to execute the warrant for treason against Brielle, the usurper. The guards moved instantly, grabbing Brielle, who was now screaming and struggling. You cannot. I have alliances. You can't touch me, she wailed, being dragged forcibly out of the room. The doors slammed shut, leaving me alone with the Alpha King. Kian was swaying, the Lycan surge of energy fading as the poison reasserted its hold. I rushed forward, supporting his weight, helping him back to the bed. He gripped my hands, his golden eyes filled with an emotional intensity one had never seen in him. The rejection, he managed, his breathing ragged. It was a lie, Jocelyn. I thought your gentleness, your quiet strength would make you a target. I rejected you to protect you from the wars of a king. I never stopped feeling the bond. I was a fool. I know, Kian, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I know. When I drank the poison, he continued, staring at my face as if memorizing every detail, I heard your silent, desperate plea. It was the purest form of loyalty. I realized that my attempt to protect you was the most selfish, dangerous thing I had ever done. It put you in the path of the very danger I tried to shield you from. He reached up and pulled my head down, pressing a feverish, desperate kiss to my forehead. It was a formal claim, witnessed only by the walls of his chamber and the silence of the bond finally sealed. I will not put you in danger again, my Luna. But I will never let you go. Your strength is not in fighting but in enduring. You are the quiet fire that ignited my true power. I held him as he finally succumbed to exhaustion, the poison still in his system, but the crisis averted. He drifted back into a deep, healing sleep, his massive arms still clamped around my waist, the fierce possessiveness of the Lycan Alpha claiming his mate. I sat by his side, running my fingers through his dark hair, the weight of my new title, Luna, settling heavily upon me. The fight for justice, for truth, and for the stability of the Shadow Moon Pack was just beginning. I had survived the attempt on my life and brought down the usurper, but my greatest duty now was to protect the king who had sacrificed everything for me. The rejected mate had returned, wounded and strong, to claim her throne beside the Lycan king. It was 3 weeks before Kian was fully recovered. The Lycan blood, once awakened, accelerated his healing, but the dose of poison had been lethal, requiring the best healers on the continent and my constant presence beside him. When he finally stepped out of his chambers, fully recovered, radiating health, and now with the latent, untamable power of the Lycan Alpha flowing through him, the entire pack felt the shift. He was stronger, fiercer, and undeniably happier than the cold, distant king they had followed for 3 years. Brielle's trial was swift. Confronted with Kian's testimony, backed by the testimony of Gavin, who had found the correspondence between her and her political allies, her regime crumbled instantly. She was exiled from the Shadow Moon Pack and stripped of all rank and title, forced to live as an outcast in the neutral zone. Our official ceremony took place in the same grand hall where the near tragedy had unfolded. I stood beside Kian, no longer in a scratchy servant's tunic, but in a dress of deep emerald green, the color of loyalty and enduring hope. The scars on my wrists were covered, but the scar on my ankle remained, a hidden testament to the fight I had won. When Kian looked at me, his eyes, now often a soft, steady gold, held no political calculation, only deep, enduring devotion. I chose her because she is my equal, my soul, and my strength, Kian declared to the assembled packs and the newly obedient council. She proved her loyalty and valor in the face of death. She is the true Luna, and she is home. And in that moment, when he placed the Luna's crown on my head, the last vestige of the rejected mate was gone. I was Jocelyn, the Luna, finally recognized, finally cherished, and finally truly home. The bond between us was now a roaring current. We never needed to speak thoughts aloud. The quiet certainty of our love was a constant, comforting pressure in the back of my mind. The Alpha King's heart, once hardened by duty and fear, was finally soft and safe with his queen. My strength was not in ruling but in healing. I returned to my first love, caring for the weak. With Kian's full support, I established new, better care facilities for the elders and the orphan children of the pack. I ruled not from the council table, but from the heart of the community, standing shoulder to shoulder with the fierce Lycan king who was no longer cold or distant, but completely, irrevocably mine. We had faced down poison and betrayal, and in doing so, we had revealed the true potent power of our mate bond. The Shadow Moon was stronger than ever, ruled by a king who had risked his life for his true love, and a Luna who had fought her way back from the brink of execution. Thank you so much for following Jocelyn's terrifying journey. I would love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me, what part of the story did you find most intriguing? Did you anticipate the big reveal that Kian's wolf was tracking Jocelyn while his human form was comatose? Were you surprised when Kian's Lycan blood was awakened, fueled by Jocelyn's desperate psychic scream? What justice do you think Brielle deserved for her ultimate betrayal? If you enjoyed watching the Luna tried to poison her, please give this video a like and hit that subscribe button. Your subscription is a massive support for me as my channel is still young and trying to grow. It means the world. See you in the next interesting story.